What's a thing that is dangerously close to collapsing? Story 1. The Ogallala Aquifer. Do you know how Kansas and Nebraska are known for essentially being endless fields of wheat and corn? Well, they do that by drilling wells in one of the largest aquifers deep under the Midwest. There isn't enough consistent rainfall in those areas for all those crops. So, well water makes up the difference, but we're draining it, and it can't be replenished. Once it's drained, it's Dust Bowl 2.0, and no more large-scale farming in the Midwest. Years ago, I worked in wastewater treatment and went out to Williston, North Dakota, to consult on fracking water treatment. The water usually can't be reused more than a couple of times at best, so the 2+ million gallons of water used to cut a well would be trucked to a location they called the Dakota Sands to be dumped. That didn't return the water to its aquifer of origin. Combine that with many local farmers/inheritors of farmland selling their water rights to the big energy company fracking rather than competing with the big farms, and it's stacking up to be a major problem. Dust storms in that area are caused by crappy farming and are not naturally occurring in the area. I agree with everything you said. I just wanted to point out that lack of water/rain is not what caused the dust bowls of the dirty 30s. Lessons were learned. We know how to farm to keep the storms from happening, but that costs slightly more, so capitalism can't go for that. Yes, the Ogallala Aquifer is a great analogy for human hubris. We ruined the land with aggressive non-native farming and created one of the largest human-caused natural disasters. We changed the climate of the central US within 10 years. We're getting catastrophic dust storms and there's no water. Yay! The US government found an underground water supply that should support our agricultural communities for centuries. Woohoo! We didn't realize how fast we'd use up the water in the Ogallala Aquifer. Now it's almost gone. Shocked Pikachu face. Kansas took taxpayer dollars from the city of Wichita, Sedgwick County, and the state to build water reclamation facilities to catch river water, filter it, and pump it back down into the aquifer. This was something like 10 years ago. To date, only the city of Wichita has built its facility. The county and the state still haven't. Where these funds went should be a pressing issue we should address, as well as getting funding for many more sites like this. Also, I can't remember his name, but there is a millionaire who is intentionally buying up any and all land that he can on top of the aquifer. I'm sure for strictly humanitarian purposes. Story 2. I don't know, but every time I go to a drugstore, it feels like we lost a war. Worked for CVS for the better part of 15 years. Around 2008 or 9, the OG leadership retired and a bunch of former executives from Macy's and JCPenney were brought in to run the front store side of the business. Their philosophy was that the only way to control profitability was to control payroll. Went from a store that at one time was budgeted 700 payroll hours per week to 230 per week. Several years later, all while doing the same sales volume year over year. Exactly what happened to the store I worked in. Had 8 to 10 full-time techs, several part-timers, 3 full-time pharmacists, and a part-timer. Within the span of 2 years, they reduced staff by half while doing the same volume. It became a vicious cycle of patients transferring out because they couldn't stand the service, then hours getting cut because of less volume, and then more leaving because of the even worse service. I don't know why the C-suite would never understand how to manage this. They would rather spend millions buying up every competitor around than actually paying the staff full-time hours. So glad I left and never looked back. A completely toxic work environment from top to bottom. I left CVS for a small local pharmacy. The service is amazing. They know my name and greet me at the counter. Prescriptions are filled in 5 minutes. The pharmacist is actually nice, not rushed, rude, and misinformed. I'm so glad I switched. I had an issue with insurance after getting married. They weren't going to cover an RX because it was written out into my maiden name, and it was too late to change, and I couldn't go without it. The pharmacist gave me enough to cover until we could get it straight. I will never go back to CVS. I had so many problems with them. I don't know why pharmacies thought selling more than just a few essentials would be profitable in the long run if it was at the cost of having a high-quality pharmacy. When they are paying pharmacists and pharmacy techs so low that you can't hire enough to fill all your positions, and the pharmacy is just randomly closed due to staffing, you have a problem. Nobody will be buying retail items from your store. Americans are on the highest amount of pharmaceuticals than ever before, so why not ensure high quality and a loyal customer base? Because right now, people are just switching to mail order delivery, and I know Amazon will put my packages where they won't be stolen, and CVS will. I've just started using actual pharmacies, independent places that don't sell anything but drugs. If you're trying to get ADHD medication, don't even consider the other places unless you just want to be unmedicated 80% of the time. Between the independent places and grocery stores, I have no reason to ever go to a drugstore like Walgreens or something unless it's just the only option to grab a snack or drink when I'm out and about. Story 3. The Rio Grande levees in El Paso's Upper Valley are old and need repair, and will fail in a major flood. The low-lying suburbs in the Upper Valley were recently deemed to be in a FEMA floodplain. Does anyone remember the flood of 2006 that tore down the new Blockbuster on Mesa? The flooding was so bad that my family had to be evacuated. I wasn't there in 06, but I grew up there until I moved in 99, and I remember a flash flood in the late 90s when I was in high school. My friend at the time had gotten stuck in a traffic jam during the flood where there was a single drainage grate in the middle of a 5-way stop. So much water rushed there from everywhere that a truck got caught in the current and tipped. The light back end eventually becoming totally vertical with its nose pointing straight down over the drainage grate. That was when they said they abandoned their car because the water was at the windows and they were afraid it wouldn't stop. I went to EHS and there were these little atriums from when the old building used to form an E shape from above before they added hallways to make those negative spaces into squares. They made them into little atriums with various plants and rabbits. Of course, those started to flood that day too, so some good folks stuck at the school came across those poor rabbits, literally treading water, and they went in to fish them out. Throughout that day and the next few, the halls were intermittently graced with a nervous rabbit or two. Flash flooding is no joke, especially in a town that isn't equipped to deal with it. I will let you know that a lot of major infrastructure is close to collapse in both Canada and the USA. A major reason is the expansion of suburbia. Just doesn't produce enough tax revenue, so priorities are made on what needs to be done, and a lot of time fixing the roads, the bridges, the levees, and other infrastructure projects is just not sexy for politicians. And if you don't want to know how bad it is, don't visit the website. Story 4. There's a waste product of burning coal called fly ash. We use it in concrete. It makes the concrete better and cheaper. Nobody is building new coal power plants, and old ones are shutting down. It's getting harder and harder to source the ash. If we have to source it from far away like China, the transportation costs erase the cost savings. We can get the same concrete with just cement and added chemicals, but it's more expensive. In 10 years, we probably won't be using it at all. It's a really minor thing that will have far-reaching consequences. Architects and engineers will probably look at ways to reduce concrete in their buildings as the costs increase. It's not likely to impact residential, but big downtown architecture is sure to be affected. A cheaper and sustainable alternative to fly ash concrete that is gaining popularity in the US is ground granulated blast furnace slag, or GGBFS cement, commonly known as slag cement. This material is derived from the byproduct of steel production, specifically from the rapid cooling of molten iron slag. When mixed with Portland cement, GGBFS enhances the durability and strength of concrete, similar to fly ash. Slag cement is widely produced and used across the United States, particularly in regions with a strong presence of steel mills. Major suppliers like the ones listed here provide slag cement, making it a readily available option for concrete production. We fear the unknown, which is what change brings. A lot of people are terrified to let go of the devil they know because they've grown accustomed to it. A lot of industries stagnate because the heavy lifting and investment to take them to mass production was done decades ago. So, corporations stick to what they have, not because we can't or haven't done better, but because they stand to profit more. EVs were that way. General Motors released the EV1 in 1996. Owners loved it, and they canceled it and crushed most of the cars 5 years later because they deemed it unprofitable. It took Tesla to properly drag the automotive industry kicking and screaming into widespread adoption. I don't love Musk or Tesla, but I have to give credit where it's due. It's still experiencing growing pains, but you can plainly see in that industry the sort of trajectory that it takes a product to go from an expensive niche to something that will eventually become the dominant product. There are lots of different methods for making concrete, and there will be more when the expense necessary to invent them becomes less than the methods available. Human beings are amazing at innovation, but we become hamstrung by greed. Also, just because lesser used methods are more expensive now doesn't mean they have to be. When massively scaled, the cost can often be reduced significantly. This isn't the crisis you're making it out to be. Concrete production is a wasteful and carbon-intensive process. It has to change if we are going to adequately address climate change. So far, leaders in the construction and building science industries have felt comfortable waving away the problems with concrete production by pointing to the low embodied energy over its lifetime, without acknowledging that it is rare for a concrete structure to last its expected lifetime. There are already alternatives to fly ash in concrete production, and there is ongoing research into better non-chemical solutions like biomass ash. I'm an architect at my firm, and we already are looking for ways to reduce the use of concrete in our buildings due to cost and time concerns related to the use of formwork, and also due to concerns about the carbon cost of traditional concrete. There will be a shift in the market, but this won't impact construction. Fun fact: as someone who works in civil engineering/construction, I've had a few conferences about this specific issue. Fly ash is what's called an admixture in concrete called a pozzolan. It was the most abundant and cheap, which is why it's so prevalent in most mixes. However, you're totally right on fly ash becoming more scarce, and the increased use of it in concrete took it from a byproduct to effectively a product to be sold. They are currently rolling out recycled pozzolans used from repurposed glass that does effectively the same thing and is also more carbon positive. Story 5. Honestly, the education system feels like it's barely holding on. With how nobody wants to be a teacher anymore, especially math, science, and special ed, the laws protecting 10% or less of students at the cost of the quality of education for everyone else, behaviors and disruptions are destroying classrooms, and laws keep those kids in the classroom. Funding is used inappropriately in so many situations, just as a few issues. Yeah, the mostly public education system is in crisis in the US. To be fair, based on the DOE's own performance metrics on students, it appears they are due for a massive overhaul, remove the bloated administrative state within DOE, and massively increase budget/payrolls for schools and teachers. I'm in my 9th year for teaching, 5th year in a public district school, and my first 4 in a public charter. The problems don't feel like budget problems, but that is all anyone ever talks about. The problems, as I see them, are the shift in parenting styles, access to devices, social media, streaming, video games, etc. Students largely don't see the value in education and just want to get home to their devices. They stay up all night on their devices and can't stay awake during class. Then teachers are criticized for the outcomes because while teaching math, we aren't making it more fun than their PS5s. I've never considered quitting because of any financial reasons, but I consider quitting every single day. College professor here, I've had to dumb down my curriculum so much over the years, with AI being the nail in the coffin. So freaking sad. I'm a middle-gen millennial, and I didn't go to college until I was in my late 20s. I couldn't believe how little was expected of students and how often instructors would just scale grades to make sure people would actually pass. There was one department at the school who was considered notoriously rigorous, but really all they were doing was refusing to dumb down the material or just pass students for the sake of making sure everyone got an A. They worked with students to make sure everyone had a chance to do well, but they made sure to do it in a way that still held students to the proper standards. Story 6. The Florida citrus industry, specifically oranges. There's a fungus that is spreading and infecting groves across the state. Unfortunately, we have no way to kill the fungus. The only solution is to cut down all citrus trees within a certain radius of an infected tree. Many farmers are choosing to sell their farms rather than try to start all over. Former Florida citrus farmer here, the disease is called citrus greening, spread by the Asian citrus psyllid feeding on the tree. It takes roughly 2 years for an infected tree to show symptoms. By that time, it was already too late. The disease slowly chokes off the tree from taking in nutrients, crippling it, causing heavy fruit drop and smaller fruit size, eventually killing the tree. The disease has no cure and has already wiped out over 90% of the industry in Florida. There is a way to fight it. We're just not doing it because giant companies like Tropicana are moving their business to Central America in order to save money. And developers are trying to get rid of the groves to build BS. I used to work on an orange grove, and we were one of the few left who chose to fight citrus greening, and we knew what was up. It's really sad, to be honest. I left Florida 2 weeks ago because I can't stand what it's become. It hasn't felt like home in almost a decade now. Lived here for 20 years, and it's really depressing to see what has come of rural Florida. You would see acres and acres of orange groves. Today, it's miles and miles of abandoned, dead trees full of weeds. Almost nobody is growing oranges anymore. They've either given up and let the trees die or started growing something else instead, like sod. There's a sense of unease in a lot of farming communities, scrambling to find out what to grow to make any money, coupled with all the fracking they do here, transforming all the land they can get a hold of into a polluted wasteland. I really want out of here because it's quite sad to see what the state is becoming. Story 7. The true American middle class. You are either upper middle class or working poor. The middle class has eroded steadily for at least 30 years. Yeah, and there doesn't seem to be an end in sight. Good-paying long-term jobs are pretty much non-existent for college grads, and even less so for those without degrees. Then there's the tax structure. Nothing beneficial to the middle class in it. I really felt like I was raised middle class. Looking back now, my parents were wealthy. Now, as a dual-income family, I feel I can barely stay afloat, and we both have great jobs and master's degrees. Have a great retirement plan, but in order to fund it, we feel like we're falling into the lower middle class. Cars keep getting older, paid for. Prop taxes and insurance keep getting higher, and the chance to send our kids to college like our parents did for us feels very slim. Our friends are driving brand new cars and living in fancy houses, and I really just want to ask them if they're just spending all they make or if they're actually growing their net worth too. On a similar note, the British middle class is basically a myth, at least in the sense of a wide class of citizens seeing substantial lifestyle improvement in the 20th century. In reality, the wealthy became ultra-wealthy, the top 20% earned a bit more, and the vast majority stayed the same. Depressingly, still today about 50% of Britons do not require probate records upon death, i.e. their estate had less than 10k pounds, about $13,000 of value in it. I live in a very high poverty state, and technically my husband and I are upper middle class, but that's only because the bar is set so low because of the median income in our state. However, we have minimal debt outside of the debt almost everyone has: mortgage, student loans, and a car payment. Our mortgage and car payment are pretty low compared to most, and we meal prep, shop at thrift stores, and basically do all the right things, and we still barely have a savings and live paycheck to paycheck. We both have master's degrees and stable jobs. A few years ago, I had some major health issues, used all 12 weeks of FMLA, and ended up having to resign from my job because I wasn't able to return at that point. And my disability insurance and credit cards were the only way we were able to survive. Having to pay COBRA premiums for insurance meant I went from paying $35 a month, because my employer covered most of the premium, to pay nearly $500 a month. Have definitely noticed this amongst my peers, being an older millennial. We bought our home early enough that we're breaking the upper middle. and then refinanced at the bottom of the market in 2021 to 15-year 1.75%. A lot of people we know are hurting with prices right now, especially the ones just a few years younger or otherwise a bit behind financially. While we paid off our car 4 years early and are finally socking money away a lot for retirement and our safety net, I mean, it's not all luck. We drove beaters for ages, but used cars were reasonable back then. Didn't have TV, rarely went out to eat, and mainly did cheap road trips instead of nice vacations. I run a tight budget and keep our subscriptions to a minimum. We made some of our own luck after starting out poor when we got married, but we are also lucky, and my own kids, who are an alpha gen, are gonna be mega screwed. A big motivation for my budgeting and investing is to be able to help our kids and give them a boost that our parents never could for us. Story 8. The Garazenda, one of the 2 remaining 12th century towers in Bologna, Italy. I saw them in April. It looks pretty ridiculous, to be honest. They have the area blocked off by some shipping containers because those towers are probably going to fall any day. It looks like there are some half-hearted restoration attempts, but no idea what their plan is. Story 9. The young childcare industry. Increased regulation to make facilities safer, a very good thing, had the unintended consequence of increasing costs for owners. You now need more teachers who have training and certification, not to mention the patience and stamina to work with young kids all day. The pay is comparable to fast food without the benefits. Owners have to find a way to pay teachers enough to retain them while keeping costs down so parents can afford to send their kids. It's damn near impossible without an infusion of government investments. I'm currently searching for a job and was shocked to see the local daycare was offering $14 an hour with no benefits to care for people's infants. A big gas station chain just built a new gas station in town and is paying $16 an hour and is offering 401k matching to ring up people's donuts and chips. The minimum wage in my state is $16 an hour. The local burger chain starts at $19.50. I make $21 an hour as a pharmacy tech, where I could make potentially fatal mistakes if I'm not careful, and where I'm responsible for tens of thousands of dollars of medications and controlled substances. I have thousands and thousands of dollars of pills literally flowing through my fingers every day, but with that level of trust and responsibility, I could literally just go work at the local burger place as a shift supervisor and probably be making more money in 6 months. How is this sustainable? I used to run an after-school site in a low-income, high-crime area. I oversaw 120 kids and 5 advisors. In the span of a year, I had to instate 2 lockdowns, remove 5 kids from the program, call an ambulance twice, and report 3 separate parents to CPS. Plus more. I made $15 an hour as a manager. I now work for a museum where all I do is answer questions and make sure people don't touch the artifacts. I make $21. Story 10. Without human intervention, your local energy grid is only about 6 to 24 hours away from complete collapse, depending on how greedy the utility company is in terms of automatic backups. The electricity grid will likely fail first and within hours. Other energy sources like city heat or natural gas will take longer because those rely less on active human inputs. Do you remember in The Last of Us TV show how Nick Offerman is in a Home Depot, the power goes out and he remarks, "That was fast"? That bit was much more accurate than anyone not involved in utilities would ever care to know about. Naughty Dog themselves discovered that when making the game, and used the detail to inspire how the city environments look, overgrown by plants and flooded. They also found out how long fuel and tires actually last. Essentially, every vehicle would become completely useless within 2 or 3 years of an apocalypse. And that's how vulnerable it is if we just do nothing. Imagine if someone or a group of someone's were to intentionally sabotage it on a large scale. How many undefended rural substations need to be hit simultaneously to knock out the entire national grids? And for how long would it be down? Scary question with a scary answer. The question has been asked, answered, and annoying, published. To take the Eastern Interconnection down, it was 4 large transformers. These specific transformers were published, which did not make people happy. However, the study had one glaring error in it that did not account for operator intervention. If they did nothing, those 4 transformers could take down the grid, but in reality, there are well-trained people who will start taking grid equipment actions. They can dispatch generation differently, activate quick start standby generators, reduce system voltage, and shed load if needed. A push in the energy world has been to have generator capacity be more local to the load rather than relying on long-distance transmission. The more local everything is, the more robust the system will be, as there are less likely to be single failure points. Worth keeping in mind too that the grid is still divided into a lot of zones that are able to disconnect from each other and operate as islands. The maintenance and checks on these systems have been pushed a lot harder over the more recent years, so there is a reasonable chance of a total collapse being stopped by protective relays. Even under a full collapse, a lot of areas will be able to come back up shortly after. Every zone has a black start plan loaded with what-ifs. In 2012, at my old house Labor Day weekend on Friday, there was a bad storm and our electricity went out. My basement also flooded a little bit. Well, come Sunday evening, it was still out. I had 2 dogs and sitting water in my basement. I was desperate and called every number I could find associated with our electricity company. That's when I got transferred to Jim. Jim and his buddies, who also worked at the electric company in my area, were down at Lake of the Ozarks for the weekend. Jim kindly explained to me, which I have forgotten most of what he said, basically exactly what you said. Our energy grid is very reliant on people like Jim and his buddies. Story 11. A month ago, I was at my grandparents' house. For an inheritance issue, they called an architect. The first thing he told them was that they could no longer live in the house because it was at risk of collapse. That night, nobody slept. We had a contractor come over for an estimate on a remodel, and after he inspected the basement and saw how the main level was supported using wooden wedges that looked banged in by a 3-year-old, asked us if we'd consider demolishing our house and building new. That was a fun day. Story 12. The Colorado River is the main water supply for 3 states with major cities. Don't forget the volume of water from that river that the US is obligated to let go to Mexico. That's why there is an entire valley in Arizona with tile just under the surface, so that they can recoup the water that doesn't get taken up by the plants and send it back to the system or onto Mexico. In case you're curious, this valley is just outside of Yuma and provides North America with the bulk of its lettuce during the winter months. In Arizona, our politicians sold land with ample groundwater at a very big discount, pennies on the dollar, to Saudi Arabia so that they could grow alfalfa here. Apparently, it is illegal to grow in Saudi Arabia because of the amount of water alfalfa requires. On another note, one community called Rio Verde decided it had enough taxes, so it built itself just outside of the Scottsdale city limits. Of course, developers built more homes and schools, but no infrastructure for things like water. Scottsdale, the nearest city, was providing water at a cost, but spent years saying January 1st, 2023, you will be cut off. Scottsdale City Council spent years giving them information for building pipes and whatnot. Rio Verde didn't do anything and they were cut off. After months of being without water, the residents protested at events like the Super Bowl, with their dehydrated children, like that was going to help their cause. They eventually agreed to what Scottsdale suggested. In a sane economy, the government would forcibly intervene to stop agribusinesses from using 50% of the river's water to grow cotton and alfalfa in the hottest desert on the continent. But because those corporations, I refuse to call them farmers because that's what they are, corporate growers, inherited the senior water rights that largely predate cities' claims. If voluntary conservation agreements fall through, they can use every last drop of their allocation before cities get their share. Even funnier is that many of these crops are heavily subsidized, so the government is essentially paying for Colorado River water to be wasted. The US has a large surplus of cotton and alfalfa. There's no need for it to be grown here. Irrigation water is sold to users at such astronomically low grandfathered-in rates that it might as well be free, while urban users pay much higher prices, like a 100 times difference. This needs to be higher. I work in the drinking water industry and was recently working in Colorado. The West is going to dry up in the near future. Lake Mead dropped over 200 feet from 2000 to 2022, and some estimates say up to 17 feet per year of level drop moving forward. Currently, it is sitting 113 feet above the dead pool, or just shy of 7 years at 17 feet per year. A dead pool means Hoover Dam makes no power. This means no water flows downstream, means very, very bad things, and there's no real plan to fix it. Sell your house in Arizona, Nevada, and California before they become a ghost town. Story 13. Personally, I live in a city called Lowell, Massachusetts, and there's the Rourke Bridge built 40 years ago that was meant to be temporary. Honestly, it reminds me of those horrible scary bridges you've seen over rivers in Siberia or some other places in Central Asia. It's loud and bumpy and you can feel the whole thing sway because it gets 25,000 cars crossing it every day. Not only that, you can actually walk under it since there's a riverwalk pathway it connects to, and you can see rusted sections just rotting away. About 6 months ago, a truck crossed it, and a panel on the surface somehow seesawed up into the gas tank. The truck made it across, but not before losing probably 80 to 100 gallons of diesel onto the bridge and into the river below. The river had a marshy/swampy area near the bridge, and you could see the fuel slick eddying and collecting into that area. I can't imagine much survived underneath, and I'm sure a lot of fish eggs and small aquatic animals died down there. The city, state, and feds have known this bridge needs replacing for decades, and they know about the rust and rot, but they continue to say that it will last for now. Don't they always say that though? There is a plan to make a new one next to it, but it won't be done until like 2028, which we all know means it'll probably drag on to 2029, 2030, etc. I honestly don't think it will last that long. Had one of the oldest bridges of its kind in the US. Built in the 1880s, started showing age back in the 1970s. Every local government official pushed it off. The creek needed to be dredged for decades. They just kept passing the buck for decades and time ran out. They were shocked by the community's outrage when they were going to destroy it. Instead of dealing with the issue, when it was small with maintenance funding, it became a major year-long super expensive mess to redirect around the historical bridge. There are 2 different roads in my city, a major Midwest city of about 2.5 million people in the metro area that have been closed down in recent years to erosion. Both are starting to fall into the rivers they run alongside. Both have been closed to vehicle traffic and are instead left open as hike/bike trails. I imagine there are probably dozens of other roads like them around town, and also throughout other towns. I live in Missouri and met someone who worked at MoDOT a few years back who said a nearby bridge is about to collapse, and the reason MoDOT isn't doing anything about it is that it's very expensive. I did not fact-check this, so grain of salt, but he said if the bridge actually collapses, it then becomes funded on the federal level as an emergency to repair/rebuild, so the state doesn't foot the bill. Story 14. The 4th graders have a little black market that they run from the girls' bathroom. I'm close to getting the kingpin. Nothing will get past this teacher. They sell Pokemon cards, pencils, snacks, and even sunglasses. I love that my students are quick enough to sell, but they have been guilty of price gouging. I want them to be driven, but not to be thieves. I grew up very poor. I have been my family's errand girl since I was 6. Every store in the neighborhood knew me. I got a job at one when I was 9, got $5 every day to just stock stuff. I would buy a couple of items and resell them back to my fellow classmates, rinse and repeat. With the profits, I would get my sister and myself pizza, Chinese food, or anything cheap to eat. My stepdad was a drug addict, and he didn't care for us. My mother was in the hospital with my little brother most of the time because he contracted tuberculosis and meningitis at age 2. So we would only see her every 4 days. She trusted our stepfather to watch over us and feed us. Well, he didn't. So even if it was one meal I could provide a day for us with my little black market, it was enough. I just read your comment and thought of this. My high school had a candy man. He didn't have the worst home life. He seemed like he came from a happy home and everything was fine, and they were just struggling financially. He started buying up those booster boxes of candy that kids sell as fundraisers and just walking around school selling them for his own profit. He made probably thousands before the school noticed he was suspiciously always carrying a little cardboard fundraiser suitcase around. I buy from him sometimes. We had a couple of classes together and our families attended the same church. He was very nice and wholesome and never said or did anything out of the way. They suspended this young entrepreneur and made a huge example out of him, and I'm still salty about it. He was a good kid. All he did was sell Snickers bars. And I get that it was against the rules, but maybe just ask him to stop, or just have him join the future business leaders or something. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you would like to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.